I wait for the Lord. My soul counts on God's word. My soul is longing for the Lord more than those who watch for daybreak. Let the sentinels wait for the dawn. Let Israel wait for the Lord. Out of the depths I cast, out of the depths I cast, out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. For with the Lord is mercy and fullness of redemption, and God will redeem Israel from all her iniquities. Out of the depths I cast, out of the depths I cast, out of the depths I cry to you. Out of the depths I cast, out of the depths I cast, out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. As the sun rises, Lord, let your light shine on me. Shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me. Destroy the darkness about me. Let your light shine on me. Scatter the darkness before me. Let your light shine on me. Disperse the darkness behind me. Let your light shine on me. Dispel the darkness within me. Let your light shine on me. Shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me. Shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me. As the sun rises, Lord, let your light shine on me. Shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me. Warmth of your presence, Lord, let your light shine on me. The brightness of your love, oh Lord, let your light shine.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening for the continuing series offered by our Human Concerns Commission. This evening we have a couple of wonderful speakers joining us, and they'll be introduced to you after we begin our gathering here with prayer. So let's begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving and gracious God, we give you thanks for the gift of this day, for the opportunity we have to gather, to be together with one another, to be enlightened, and to be reminded of the call that the gospel proclaims to us always and everywhere, that we are to be a people who bring about justice and peace in our world. Watch over us this evening and inspire us with the gift of your Spirit, that we may know your love and open our minds to all the many opportunities that are available to us as your people of faith to proclaim the good news, to release those from captivity, and to bring about justice and peace in our world. Continue to watch over and guide and inspire our speakers this evening, that they may be inspiration to all of us as we strive to understand the social justice that we are called to in and through the gospel. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. It's off to Deacon Greg.
Thank you, Father. As Father mentioned, I'm the deacon here at St. Rita's. And tonight's presentation is part of a speaker series hosted by our Human Concerns Commission. The series is an effort to carry out the justice education portion of our mission. These talks are an introduction to the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching. And included in these presentations is how these themes are lived out. How do we actually live this out? In other words, it's not just something we read in a book or theology. These things are lived out in our daily life. And so we'll include that as well tonight to give you an idea of what it looks like. Our hope in doing these talks is that we'll help you who are attending to integrate these social teachings as part of your Catholic identity. So tonight's talk is on the primary and the foundational theme of life and dignity of the human person. Our first speaker, Tia Westhoff, will give an explanation of the theme and all the issues that are included in it. After Tia's presentation, then we'll take a 10-minute break in the back where there's beverages and snacks. And at that time, our high school students are going to remain out there and reflect on the talk that Tia has given. And for the rest of us, we'll come back in here then, and we'll have Steve Cross here. We'll present his theme on how this is lived out in the Racine and Kenosha areas. After Steve's talk, we'll have a question and answer period on what they presented. And then we'll end the evening with a prayer by Matt Schmidt of our Respect Life Committee. And then you're welcome to stay and socialize a little bit in the back and ask questions more, any other questions, or just, to socialize as you might want to. Okay, so let's get started. Tia Westhoff is the Associate Director for Human Life and Social Concerns with the Wisconsin Catholic Conference. She earned her Master of Public Affairs degree from the University of Wisconsin La Follette School of Public Affairs in 2021, while working at the Thompson Center on Public Leadership. Tia studied theology and philosophy at Benedictine College and previously worked in nonprofits serving mothers in need and individuals with disabilities. So please give a warm welcome to Tia Westhoff.
Good evening, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be with you tonight, and I really want to extend my gratitude to Deacon Greg and the Human Concerns Committee for inviting me here to talk about this. I work for the Wisconsin Catholic Conference, which is the public policy voice of Wisconsin's Catholic Church. Our board is the Bishops of Wisconsin, and you met one of those bishops at the outset of this series with Bishop Skilba. We represent the 5 dioceses in Wisconsin, including Milwaukee, Madison, La Crosse, Green Bay, and Superior, and we offer a statewide response to issues common to all the dioceses. We also advocate on behalf of the church to public policy makers, largely providing legislators with the church's studied positions on social and moral issues, both through testimony at public hearings and meeting with legislators one-on-one. We issue action alerts to Catholics throughout the state with important issues here at the state and the federal level. Another facet of what we do is speaking at events, just like this one. So we do parish outreach by helping lay Catholics understand the issues and advocate. And the last main thing we do is provide a forum for diocesan personnel across our 5 dioceses to meet, exchange information, and then recommend next steps for work across the diocese. At the WCC, we have 4 people on staff. We have an executive director, another associate director for education and religious liberty issues, and a fantastic office manager. In our office, I tackle human life and social concerns. A little bit more about me before we get started. I'm a native of northeastern Iowa, right by the Field of Dreams. And Father Bob Gross, who some of you may or may not know, he was actually my high school chaplain, and he still is my spiritual director to this day. So it is a small world. After college, I worked for several years in nonprofits, and specifically at one that served homeless women, and I'll talk about that a bit later. And then also, I'm very new to this job. I've been on the job for 6 months, and it's cheesy, but this was my dream job, and it's really kind of lived up to the hype so far. So, we're here tonight to talk about Catholic social teaching. Catholic social teaching is like the hidden jewel of Catholicism. I can distinctly remember where I was when I first learned about it. There was this kind of kooky economics professor, and the chalkboard was very dusty, but I just was overcome by this wonder and this feeling of like, wow, like this is all connected and it all applies, and we can be consistent in the way that we apply it. So I hope that many of you find similar connections. By way of review, our 7 themes of Catholic social teaching are life and dignity of the human person, call to family, community, and participation, rights and responsibilities, preferential option for the poor and vulnerable, dignity of work and the rights of workers, solidarity, and care for God's creation. Tonight, we're specifically addressing the first of them. So the very first thing, and maybe the most important thing you should know from tonight's talk, is that the whole of the church's social doctrine comes from the principle that affirms the inviolable dignity of the human person. Oh, yeah. Be a little bit louder for you. If you can't hear, just like wave your hands or smoke signals or something. Let's dive right in on what this principle means. The first thing we need to know is that we're made in God's image and likeness. In Genesis chapter 1, the very, very start of our biblical story, we learn that the human persons have been created in the image and likeness of God. We hear it all the time, but this is truly radical, not something to take lightly. We believe that who we are as people provides a meaningful insight into what God is. And because we're made in God's image and likeness, this means that the very essence of what we are, the stuff that makes us breathe, that our life is sacred. We're precious. God wants to dwell in us, in who we are, which is both body and soul. And then the whole of our life is a quest and a search for God. We're created to be in relationship with Him who made us. But we also know that after being created in God's image, humanity fell. We're not God, and in original sin, we told God as much. Original sin afflicts each and every one of us here on earth, where we have the freedom to choose the good or not. It separates us from God, but also from ourselves. Of sin, St. Paul says, what I do not understand. For I do not do what I want, but I do what I hate. And some days I can really relate to that. Sin also separates us from each other and from the rest of the world. We know our relationships are broken. Every sin has both personal and social consequences, but sin always remains an act of the person and not a group or a community. We do know that social sins are ones that are committed against the justice due in relationship between individuals and the community. The Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church, which is a big fat book I highly recommend if you're interested. I brought it with me so you can see it. Says that today we see these played out in two distinct ways. The all-consuming desire for profit and the thirst for power with the intention of imposing one's will on others at any price. Many of these abuses of human life, born in sin, which we'll touch on soon, have this social component. But Jesus, who became human to save us, offers each and every one of us salvation from our sins. It's unrestricted. Salvation is offered to each and every human person. We have the freedom to turn to him even until we draw our last breath. Next thing we need to know about this principle is that each and every human life has equal dignity. Men and women have the same dignity and are of equal value. Why? Because we're both created in the image of God. But even more importantly, because this dynamic of reciprocity between men and women is an image of God himself in Trinitarian unity between the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And our union as husband and wife with one another allows us to participate in God's act of creation. He gives us this great gift of being able to bring more people into the world who are imbued with this equal dignity. Because of our equality, every attempt to make someone lesser than another is misguided. No matter race, sex, age, socioeconomic status, saint or sinner, each of us possesses inviolable human dignity. So all forms of oppression and unjust discrimination are incompatible with who we are. We are also unique and unrepeatable, with inherent dignity, inherent meaning something permanent or absolutely essential to what a person is. Our dignity goes on even after our earthly life ends. There's nothing we can do to gain or take away this dignity since it's God-given and not earned. John Paul II wrote that dignity as a human person doesn't come from the work you do, but from the person that you are. Take away all your work, your school, your talents, your hobbies, your family, your friends. It's good that you exist, even if you're not contributing anything. There's a good phrase that you often see spicing up inspirational memes on Facebook, which say, "You're a human being, not a human doing." And it's cheesy, but it's true. We also know that no human life is disposable. Not those who are at the beginning or at the end of their life, not those who have done the worst things imaginable. The fifth commandment, "You shall not kill," applies to everyone. As Catholics, we believe in the unshakable value of life from conception until natural death, no matter what happens in between those 2 years on your gravestone. And so, people are more important than things. Next, by nature, we are social beings. It's not good for us to be alone. We were made to be with each other. In Mark chapter 12, Jesus lays it out clearly. He says, the first and most important commandment is you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And then he says the second commandment is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment that's greater than those two things. The reason we have a society is for the good of the human person. St. John the 23rd wrote that individual human beings are the foundation, the cause, and the end of every social institution, be that this church, the local high school, hospital, or county government. Therefore, the measure of any society is whether it threatens or enhances the life and dignity of the human person, especially the most vulnerable. We pursue the common good, which is made up of individual human persons and their dignity and solidarity as we are all interconnected. Lastly, the principle shows that our dignity is at the root of all human rights. Human rights don't come from the state, power, or some sort of collective will arising out of a general agreement. They come from what we're made of. These rights include the right to life, which is the condition for the exercise of any other right, the right to live in a united family, the right to develop our intelligence and freedom to seek and to know truth, the right to share in a work that makes wise use of our Earth's resources and derive the means to support ourselves and everyone who's dependent on us, the right to freely establish a family, and the right to religious freedom, which is the source and synthesis of all other rights. We also know that rights can't be separated from responsibilities. We can't wield our rights without possessing the responsibility to wield them well. And so to claim that some human beings do not deserve respect or should not be treated as persons based on changeable factors like age, condition, location, or lack of ability is to deny the very idea of inherent rights. So, what threats do we see to the life and dignity of a human person today, and how can we uphold it? So, I want to say by way of disclaimer that we will not get to every issue affecting life and dignity of a human person because it touches all aspects of the church's social doctrine. So even if I don't address it tonight, don't think it's not there. It's not that the church hasn't been thinking deeply about it. In the upcoming talks that you'll have, you'll likely get into more of some of the other issues. And I think, too, that as I was writing this talk, I forgot about one, which was murder. It's just kind of so self-evident to us, and there's been very little dispute on it throughout history. We're very clear on you cannot intentionally take the life of another. But, as we'll see, things get a little bit muddier. So I want to first talk about a section which is on medicine. So there's some important issues here. So I first want to turn to the case of euthanasia and assisted suicide. In the case of euthanasia, where a patient or a physician administers a lethal drug to a patient, and assisted suicide, where a physician provides the means for a patient to end his or her own life, these both violate the inherent dignity and inviolability of the person. We have a moral obligation to care for our own life and health, and to seek such care from others, while also recognizing that we're not morally obligated to use all available medical procedures in every set of circumstances. We must never directly intend to cause our own death or the death of an innocent victim by action or omission. In the U.S., there are 10 states in the District of Columbia who have legalized physician-assisted suicide, but Wisconsin is not one of them. But that doesn't mean that it's not coming. In West Virginia, parents of a 16-year-old girl and 17-year-old boy are currently, right now, suing Amazon because it sold the teenager's suicide powder. In Canada, just across the border, physician-assisted suicide has gotten out of hand. There have been many media stories of people with disabilities being approved for or dying by euthanasia because of poverty, inability to receive necessary medical treatment, fear of homelessness, and even recently a boy who said that he just didn't want to live with type 1 diabetes. Canadian doctors are offering euthanasia even before receiving a request from a patient. At times, insurance companies are denying care since assisted suicide is available. On its surface, proponents will say this is fundamentally about autonomy, about personal choice. But firstly, we know that autonomy is not the first principle of medicine, it's actually healing. The argument is eerily similar to the right to choose abortion debate. Assisted suicide disproportionately targets those with disabilities, who are sick, who are dying, those that are most vulnerable. And people don't want to be a burden, and suicide can be cheaper than living. But it's a cheap substitute for providing care for those who need us. What about those hard decisions at the end of life where sometimes we have to choose how much treatment to offer someone? In these circumstances, I would really recommend a booklet that the Wisconsin bishops put together called Now and at the Hour of Our Death on end-of-life issues, including withholding or withdrawing life supports, pain management, organ donation, advanced directives, and more. And I have a copy with me today in case anyone wants to see it. Some things we need to think about in this area are rejecting proposals to legalize physician-assisted suicide, promoting access to quality health care for everyone, as a family having discussions about end-of-life care, and then going out of our way to assist those around us who are sick and dying. The next point I want to talk about is care for elders and persons with disabilities and chronic or terminal illnesses. Concern for those with disabilities and illnesses was one of the most prominent features of Jesus' public ministry. When the disciples of John the Baptist ask Jesus whether he is the Messiah, he responds, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind recover their sight, cripples walk, lepers are cured, the deaf hear, dead men are raised to life, and the poor have the good news preached to them." Jesus cherished the human lives of everyone, but he specifically sought out those who were afflicted with disease. He doesn't seek the company of the rich and powerful, but those who are bearing crosses themselves. No affliction or limitation impedes Jesus' ability to reach us, and no impairment reduces the dignity of the human person or our obligation to care for them. Charles Camozzi is a Catholic ethicist at Fordham University. His book, Losing Our Dignity, How Secularized Medicine is Undermining Fundamental Human Equality, brings up many salient points on which I think are important in our conversations about how we're caring for the most vulnerable. He says that in today's world, religion has a place only when the medical arsenal has been exhausted and death is imminent. Healthcare system tends to reduce the human person to an economic valuation and doesn't see the spiritual dimensions of healing or the value of caring for those with limitations. This view of the human person cheapens the idea of human dignity that is given to us, because equality doesn't come from the level of medical technology we happen to have readily available right now, or the abilities that we're born with. It sends the false message that some lives are worth caring for and others are not. There are increasing cases of those with extreme disabilities, where those who are deemed too expensive to care for are left to die, or those in nursing homes being neglected for weeks on end, having little human contact and sometimes little basic hygienic care. And it's important that we as Catholics really pay attention to this now, because as we continue to live longer, we know that the number of us living with neurodegenerative diseases and other disabilities is only going to grow. We have the opportunity, as many orders of religious sisters have before us, to care for those who cannot care for themselves. Justice demands that we treat the vulnerable as the equals of the powerful at all times, even when it's inconvenient, like when it strains our resources, and perhaps especially when it's most inconvenient. Camozzi also proposes some actions we as Catholics need to think about taking, like sounding the cultural alarm, living out a counterculture of responsibility, of encounter, of radical hospitality. We can put our families first by making choices about housing and debt and living situations that allow us to care for our parents or other older family members, resisting the temptation to live far from family members who would support us or those we have a familial obligation to support, resisting the temptation to artificially limit the number of children we bear, adopt, or foster. Thinking of the home as belonging to more than just the nuclear family, and refusing to have family members be cared for by robots, which there are hints of that coming in the future. We can volunteer in nursing homes, consider second careers serving those with disabilities. On the public policy side, we can work to ensure that resources are allocated to families to take care of elderly and disabled loved ones at home, and then also advocate for better care in care centers when the individual's needs extend beyond what can be provided at home. And if we want adequate care, we have to start paying those who are providing these services well and providing benefits. Camozzi also says that it would be great to have more religious orders. So if you have a vocation to care for those in need. Our own Christian healthcare institutions must be prepared to resist the throwaway culture, which will only be increasing in our legislation. And further, we really need to think about how our own Catholic institutions, our schools and our churches and more, are including those with disabilities by providing accommodations. I saw something just the other day that said Bishop Barron with Word on Fire recently announced that he was starting a new ministry to provide more resources to those with disabilities. So that's great news. And the last thing in this category I want to talk about is the dignity of human life in medical and scientific research. There's a couple things under this category as well. The first is cloning, which is a replication of one person's genetic material into another. The technique can be used for two purposes, whether to produce a live-born child, which is called reproductive cloning, or to create human embryos to be destroyed in medical experiments, so-called therapeutic cloning. While human cloning is banned in the US, scientists in other parts of the world have claimed that they've produced fully human embryos but killed them before birth. The Federal National Human Genome Research Institute says that the US is not performing these experiments, but state laws look a little bit more lax. Wisconsin considered a ban on cloning in 2005, but the governor did not sign it. Another threat to human life is embryonic stem cell research. Embryonic stem cell research is about destructively harming some of the living human embryos in the name of helping others who might be struggling with diseases. Those who are in favor of this practice will often seek to dehumanize embryos, suggesting that because they're so microscopic and appear to be so very different from us, they couldn't really be one of us. This comes from a basic error in understanding human biology. The National Catholic Bioethics Center says that early embryos, it's true, they look unfamiliar to us. They lack hands and feet. They don't look like what we expect to see when we look at a human being. But they're precisely as human as each of us. When we look at a micrograph of a human embryo, a small cluster of cells sitting on the point of a sewing pin, we do well to ask ourselves a simple question. Isn't that exactly what a young human is supposed to look like? The correct answer to that question doesn't depend on religion, revelation, or theology, but only on embryology. We may be unaccustomed to seeing these photos of embryos, but we need to remind ourselves that what we're viewing is kind of a family photo. You looked like that. Your children look like that. Many people imagine, too, that given the impassioned discussion and pervasive media pressure to use embryos, many sick human patients must have already benefited from the use of embryonic stem cell therapies, but no therapies in humans have ever been successfully carried out using embryonic stem cells that come from adult or umbilical cord stem cells. Another area in medicine that's threatening human life is the increasing use of assisted reproductive technologies. So, in the US alone, there are thousands of fertility clinics, sperm banks, egg brokers, and surrogate mothers annually producing about 10,000 children. Helen Alvarez, a Catholic law professor at George Mason University, says that many people, including many Catholics, are unaware of our moral response in these practices. Not surprisingly, many find it difficult to imagine that our faith would have moral objections to married couples making babies by any means. But the church does firmly object. Church documents such as Donum Vitae and Evangelium Vitae explain the arguments against substituting a technological act for married love as the source of procreation. The assistive reproductive technology industry tends to commodify children, and these processes may involve freezing, destroying, or donating for experiments the embryos left over from clients. The last area to think about in this area are vaccines and other therapies that use the stem cells of aborted fetuses. The document Donum Vitae formulated the general principle which must be observed in these cases. They say, the corpses of human embryos and fetuses, whether they've been deliberately aborted or not, must be respected just as the remains of other human beings. In particular, they cannot be subjected to mutilation or to autopsies as if their death has not yet been verified and without the consent of their parents or of the mother. Furthermore, the moral requirements must be safeguarded that there be no complicity in direct abortion. It is an offense against the dignity of the human person to experiment with lives in this way. In cases where we have no choice as individuals but to take a morally problematic vaccine, though, as we saw come up during the COVID pandemic, the Vatican has said that all vaccinations that are recognized as clinically safe and effective can be used in good conscience, with the certain knowledge that the use of such vaccines does not constitute formal cooperation with the abortion from which the cells used in the production of the vaccines derive. It should be emphasized, however, that the morally illicit use of these types of vaccines in the particular conditions that make it so does not in itself constitute a legitimation, even indirect, of the practice of abortion, and necessarily assumes the opposition to this practice by those who make use of these vaccines. So, all of those long quotes to say, moving forward, we must work to ensure that both pharmaceutical companies and governmental health agencies are encouraged to produce, approve, distribute, and offer ethically acceptable vaccines that don't create problems of conscience for healthcare providers or for those of us who need to be vaccinated. In closing, these technologies may seem like a new way to create or to foster human life, but fundamentally these technologies are doing violence to the human person. Catholic tradition really honors natural reason and the sciences, unless these disciplines overreach themselves and claim there is no fundamental dignity to life at its inception. I'm going to take a quick drink of water here. Oh, yeah. Let me know if I blow out your ears. Okay. Now we're going to turn to issues in the community. The first one I want to talk about is the death penalty. The Catechism of the Catholic Church is clear that the death penalty is inadmissible because it's an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the human person. Our teaching begins with the recognition that the dignity of the human person applies both to victims of crimes and the perpetrators of them. It affirms our commitment to seek justice, comfort, and support for victims and their families, while acknowledging the God-given dignity of every human life, even for those who do great harm. John Paul II said that modern society has the means of protecting itself without definitively denying criminals the chance to reform. The traditional teaching of the Church does not exclude recourse to the death penalty if this is the only possible way of effectively defending human lives against the unjust aggressor. If, however, non-lethal means are sufficient to defend and protect people's safety from the aggressor, the Catechism says that the authority must limit itself to such means. The test of whether the death penalty can be used is not the gravity of the crime, but whether it's absolutely necessary to protect society. Today, the cases in which the execution of the offender is an absolute necessity are very rare, if perhaps totally non-existent. A woman who had both her brother and sister-in-law murdered had this to say: "No one in our family ever wanted to see the killer of our brother and his wife put to death. We felt instinctively that vengeance wouldn't alleviate our grief. We wanted this murderer in prison so that he could never hurt another person, but wishing he would suffer and die would only have diminished us and shriveled our own souls. Hatred doesn't heal. Every time the state kills a person, human society moves in the direction of its lowest, most base urges. Our lawmakers have the capacity to help us abolish the death penalty, and along with it, the fantasy that it will make the pain go away." Some big things to know. Since about 1973, over 139 people from 26 states have actually been exonerated, found not guilty from death row after evidence of innocence was found. Rather than showing the system is working, exonerations provide evidence that our system is flawed. DNA testing can't solve these problems because DNA evidence exists in only about 10% of criminal cases. Over 90% of those on death row across the country were too poor to provide their own attorney. Studies by states across the country show geography plays a big role in who lives and who dies. The same crime in one county may carry the weight of death penalty, and it doesn't in the next. And African Americans constitute 42% of death row inmates, showing that race is playing a huge factor in this institutionalized murder. Here in Wisconsin, the death penalty was thankfully abolished in 1854. So legally, what we need to do is ensure that we maintain this ban, but there are 27 states in the U.S. where capital punishment is on the books, along with the federal government and the U.S. military. Over recent decades, our bishops here in the U.S. have been very vocal about ending this practice. Second topic I want to raise is human trafficking. So we know that no human being should ever be abused or enslaved. The United Nations Protocol defines human trafficking as the recruitment, transportation, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of exploitation. According to the State Department here in the U.S., human trafficking appears in many guises, often taking the form of commercial sexual exploitation, the prostitution of minors, debt bondage, and involuntary servitude. Every year, millions of men, women, and children fall into the hands of traffickers in their own countries and abroad. And no sector or industry is immune from human trafficking. Victims may be workers in food processing factories, waiters or cooks at restaurants, construction workers, agricultural laborers, fishers, housekeeping staff at hotels, domestic help in private residences, or sex-trafficked men and women in brothels, massage parlors, and spas. According to the UN, nearly 40.3 million people are victims of modern slavery, of whom 24.9 million are entrapped in forced labor and sexual slavery, and 15.4 million subjected to forced marriage. Some of you may be aware that the Catholic Church is seeking to help those in our communities here in Wisconsin. Franciscan Peacemakers, based in Milwaukee, does a lot of street work, connecting women survivors of sexual exploitation to safe housing, work, and healing. And I had the opportunity to hear Deacon Steve talk a little bit ago, and he's really an invaluable expert in this area. He's local. Additionally, you probably heard about the St. Paquita Catholic Worker House, which just opened at the end of September in Milwaukee, started by Ann Haynes, which is providing a supportive community for those escaping sex trafficking. These are both really inspirational ministries, and they're taking place in our backyard. So, along with supporting ministries like these, we really need to advocate for survivors' access to services that help them in escaping their situation and rebuilding their lives, and paying attention for the signs of trafficking, and then fighting pornography, which is part of what's fueling exploitation. Next thing I want to briefly touch on is the intentional targeting of civilians in war and terrorist attacks. We're all over the board here, but now we're on war. So on the eve of World War II, Pope Pius XII said these prescient words. He said, "Nothing is to be lost with peace, but everything can be lost with war." The Church recognizes that a nation has not just the right, but the obligation to ensure the security of its citizens and to respond to an aggression, even by means of military force, though there are very limited conditions where it's warranted. In other situations, the community of nations has an obligation to block the hand of the aggressor. We're seeing that right now in Ukraine, when that nation threatens those who cannot defend themselves. But the Catechism says all citizens and all governments are obliged to work for the avoidance of war. So too, we need to look at the mistreatment of prisoners by our own government. Nations must protect the right to life by finding ways to prevent conflicts and resolve them by peaceful means to avoid the suffering and death of citizens. And the last pretty expansive topic I want to touch on in this area is subhuman living and working conditions in our communities. There are a few key quotes I want to provide, the first from the Catechism. There exist also sinful inequalities that affect millions of men and women. These are in open contradiction of the gospel. Their equal dignity as persons demands that we strive for fairer and more humane conditions. Excessive economic and social disparity between individuals and peoples of the one human race is a source of scandal and militates against social justice, equity, human dignity, as well as social and international peace. In our communities today, you and I can look around and see poverty, lack of housing, subpar employment, insufficient education, lack of nutritious food, marginalization of immigrants, the effects of racism, and polluted environment. None of these things are truly fulfilling the true dignity of the human person. I want to turn to Pope Francis for the next one. This one's a good one. All right. Just as the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," sets a clear limit in order to safeguard the value of human life, today, we also have to say, "Thou shalt not," to an economy of exclusion and inequality. Such an economy kills. How can it be that it is not a news item when an elderly homeless person dies of exposure, but it is news when the stock market drops by 2 points? This is a case of exclusion. Can we continue to stand by when food is thrown away and people are starving? This is a case of inequality. Today, everything comes under the laws of competition and survival of the fittest, where the powerful feed upon the powerless. As a consequence, masses of people find themselves excluded and marginalized, without work, without possibilities, without any means of escape. Human beings are themselves considered consumer goods to be used and then discarded. We've created a throwaway culture, which is now spreading. In each of those areas, which will be addressed fully in more talks that you'll have down the line, we see that Catholics need to actively work for the common good in so many parts of our communities, because we all deserve a dignified life. Now we're headed into the third and final section. Thanks for holding on. So the next one is about abortion and women in need. Though our laws now offer greater protection to unborn children after the overturn of Roe v. Wade, we have a long way to go in creating a culture of life. The Catholic Church is firm in that direct abortion willed either as an end or as a means, is gravely contrary to the life and dignity of the human person. From the moment of conception, a child is genetically an entirely new human person, distinct from either of his or her parents. And every child is a new gift from God. But there are some really hard situations, and those exceptions are the ones we're seeing battles over now and are likely to see more of after the election. Some of these include life-threatening pregnancies, rape, incest, and then economic factors. In the case of life-threatening pregnancies, we have to seek to protect both mother and child as much as we can. Just as during end-of-life care, when we're making anguishing and careful decisions, so must we approach these questions with reason and care and sensitivity. No two women are the same, so in every case of rare but serious complications, doctors must care for her and her child specifically. So what does this mean in practice? It means that in life-threatening situations, the church teaches that a woman and a child can be humanely separated from one another, making every effort to save them both. This is not abortion, as the death of the unborn child is not sought. If you're interested in learning more on this topic and other bioethical issues, I'd recommend checking out the work of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. So, rape and incest are horrific violations of the dignity of the human person, and so much needs to be done to help the survivor of this kind of tragic abuse and ensure the perpetrator is never able to do this to another person. But we can't try to fix this problem by doing another act of violence toward another innocent person, the child. This is because the circumstances of conception don't change the essential and inviolable dignity of that human person. Abortion can only inflict a second act of violence that is irreparable, can never be undone. In the case of sexual assault, Catholic hospitals do have protocols that may help ensure conception does not take place, and more info on that too at the National Catholic Bioethics Center website. And encourage anyone encountering an abortion in their past or one of these acts of violence really to reach out for help. The church has some good ministries in this area. Finally, it should be said that the majority of women who have an abortion say that they could not afford a baby now. They could not afford a baby now. The reality is that our social and economic structures pit a woman against her child and tell her, essentially, for you to be equal to a man in this society, you have to have the ability to kill your own child. As a college student, I myself got very invested in pro-life public policy and spent some summers interning in DC. After I graduated, though, I felt like I didn't really understand what the reality of what it would be like to be someone who was pressured to get an abortion was. I had book smarts from my classes, but I wouldn't really be able to contribute anything legislatively beyond parroting someone else's talking points. Through a very clear and kind of miraculous direction from God, which is a whole nother story I could tell later, I was drawn to this nonprofit in Phoenix called Maggie's Place. Maggie's Place is a network of homes of hospitality and ongoing supports for pregnant and parenting women and their children, and it's named so in honor of St. Mary Magdalene. It was founded in 2000 by a group of naive but very ambitious young women in their early 20s who were wholly committed to Catholic social teaching by living amongst the poor in downtown Phoenix. They were inspired by the examples of Dorothy Day and the L'Arche homes for individuals with disabilities, and they took a house run down and filled with bullet holes and a few scorpions, actually, and made it into a community of love for homeless mothers that's now seen the births of almost 1,000 children, and transformed women along the way in the most broken of situations, and volunteers who just kind of stumbled there like me. I got off the plane into the scorching heat of June in Phoenix, and then I walked into one of the most beautiful and welcoming homes I'd ever seen. But beneath the home's beauty was immense pain and suffering. The women I shared a bathroom with had battled adversity as I was spared: abuse, neglect, addictions, crime, violence, mental illness, interrupted education, employer exploitation, recent incarceration, dangerous homes, the infinite creativity of human suffering. Even after I started running one of these homes, I didn't know how to face this suffering. I marveled at other volunteers who worked with abandon because rather than throwing themselves headlong into tasks like I did, they helped ensure the stability of the home and cherish each mother and child. They stood where their feet were at that very moment. They allowed themselves to be pierced by her suffering, to remain in it with her without flinching. Coming to terms with the unpredictability of these moms' lives and my own naivete, it doesn't take much to see that I'm not a wealth of street smarts. I trusted in divine providence by necessity. I think I trusted in divine providence and not myself for the first time in my life, really. One night, we had a mom banging on our door. Her baby wasn't breathing. The senior team member leapt up and called an ambulance, and they were gone. We had a restless night. We didn't hear anything. The next morning at 8 a.m. Mass, the first reading was about a prophet who healed a mother's baby who wasn't breathing. We returned home to the news that baby Ariel would live. Another time very early on, our house was very, very low on food, and our houses were committed to subsisting as far as possible on just what the Lord could provide. And one day it struck me that, we can pray for food. And I kid you not, 5 minutes after we walked out of that chapel, we had vats of food arrive on our front doorstep. I think the thing that I really want to convey about my time working at Maggie's Place is that I walked in thinking that if a mom just had enough time to get on her feet by living in this home, that everything after that could be okay. When I walked in, I wanted to see if it worked, if this housing model worked, and then replicated 100 times over by convincing federal officials to just create a program that subsidizes them. But what I realized is there's no one-size-fits-all solution to poverty. Each woman carried a web of her own interconnected issues drawn into greater complexity by the fact that there's infinite creativity in human suffering. She also has her own needs, her own goals, her own family situation, her own traumas to get through, and her own way of dealing with those traumas. And some women are ready, and some women relapse. What became the most important thing that any of us who were working in the homes could do is offer unconditional love. It was forgiving. It was not judging. It was patient. It didn't expect that just because I was putting work in for you or gave you some good advice that I was owed anything for that. I think that at the core of human suffering is not really economic hardship, but really a form of relational poverty, one that feeds off our loneliness and our distance from one another and tells us that no matter what you do or who you are, you can never be enough. The women I lived with were used to rejection. They were used to being used. They were used to quid pro quo. They were not used to people still wanting to be their friend after they hurled verbal insults at them. The best thing that you or I can do for a mom in need is simply to look in her eyes without flinching at the worst of what we find and tell her that I'm not going anywhere and you are enough. This is at the core of what the nationwide Catholic initiative, Walking with Moms in Need, is all about. Walking with Moms in Need is a process through which Catholic parishes and communities walk in the shoes of local pregnant and parenting moms in need. We're not trying to turn Catholic parishes into pregnancy centers, but we can support local pregnancy centers where they exist, like Alliance Family Services. And we can also find and share other resources with pregnant and parenting women. I'm on the diocesan team for the Diocese of Madison where I live, and the first thing we're trying to do is compile a list of resources available throughout the 11 counties in our diocese to share with the parishes, but fundamentally those resources only help when we're turning to the families in our pews, you and I are, getting to know them, and helping them to feel seen. The USCCB put out a parish action guide, which I'm sure someone in your parish has already gotten to work on, and I'd encourage anyone who's remotely interested to get involved, and even if you don't get involved formally, to just be more aware of how you encounter people in your daily life, and that you don't know what they're going through, and you showing up might be the greatest gift you could ever give. And because I work for the Catholic Conference, I have to also talk about practical policy things that we can do to advance Catholic social teaching and the care for women, children, and families. We are at a really critical moment in history where our support for women must increase. We haven't won. This is only the beginning, right? Just last week, the USCCB came out with a letter asking for a bipartisan effort to implement policies that will really show up for families. And I believe Deacon Greg has these printed out for anyone who wants to take one home. They're at the back. So in it, they call for a paradigm shift from an abandonment of women masquerading as freedom to radical solidarity. As Catholics, part of this radical solidarity takes place through that personal encounter, and the other is concretized through public policy. So in our work at the WCC, we're really focused on working to promote laws that will expand support for women, children, and families in this upcoming legislative session that starts in January. So the first thing we need to think about is securing women's basic needs. I have to aid women whose situation prevents them from being able to meet their basic needs. So we have to make sure that women and children have access to affordable and quality health care, including prenatal and postnatal care, mental health care, and substance use treatment. So just a sidebar on that piece about treatment. It would take more than both of my hands to count the number of women who told me when I was living at Maggie's place that my baby is the only reason I'm alive. So the power of a mother's love can sometimes overcome the worst of addictions and the most improbable of circumstances. We must especially work to improve our state's infant and maternal mortality rates, which illustrate that there are significant racial disparities in access to vital health care. So partly to address this, the WCC will again be working to ensure that pregnancy-related Medicaid coverage is extended to a full year after you give birth to a baby and not just a month or two. Additionally, we know that pregnancy resource centers have provided life-saving care to women and their unborn children through the years, and we must look for ways to increase our public support for them. We must also address barriers that mothers face in securing affordable childcare. So there is a huge lack of affordable childcare, and especially some of these women are working outside of a 9-to-5 schedule, so they need care at night, and it's very rare to find. Beyond childcare, we're in need of innovative solutions to ensure every family has a roof over their head, food on the table, and reliable transportation. And we must also be concerned for the welfare of immigrant families and support their basic needs and inclusion within our communities. In the workforce, women still lack adequate protections. We know that some degree of leave is always going to be needed when a mother gives birth to a child. But children also get sick, and without a support system, mothers have no choice but to take time off of work. And yet our current Family Medical Leave Act, which provides up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave, does not protect those who've been working in their current position for less than a year or those who work for an employer with less than 50 employees. And even if a woman qualifies for this unpaid leave, she may not even be able to afford to take that time off of work, which is really a recipe for disaster. Our Conference of Catholic Bishops in the United States supports federal legislation for paid sick and family leave. It's also supported the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act to clearly require employers to provide reasonable accommodations to workers with medical needs due to pregnancy or childbirth. We know that employment practices that are actually conducive to having and raising children are very sorely needed. Additionally, there's a Pump for Nursing Mothers Act that we're trying to get passed at the federal level, which would require employers to extend simple accommodations to women who just need to express breast milk at work. The WCC supports mirroring these laws too at our state level and supporting policies that promote parenting students' access to affordable education and broadband. There should be ways for mothers to exist on college campuses. In this way, more women may be able to further their education and work remotely while caring for their children. The tax code also offers another way to promote family stability. So There have been calls for increases to the earned income tax credit, which helps families meet large one-time expenses and participate in the economic life of their communities more fully. A state adoption tax credit, too, can make the adoption process a lot more affordable for those families who open their homes and their hearts to children born both domestically and abroad. And we know that adoption is far too expensive. Often, the USCCB has called for an expansion, too, of the child tax credit, which many families used during the pandemic to meet basic needs, including food, utility bills, rent or mortgage payments, clothing, and education. This tax credit can also be given to pregnant women whose children haven't been born yet. And then finally, we must root out marriage penalties in the tax code and public assistance programs to support healthy marriages. In securing access to these basic needs, we can find common ground across the aisle and even transcend the abortion debate. So the letter also says that those who disagree on the morality or the justice of abortion should nonetheless come together to pursue common ground solutions to provide care and support to mothers, children, and families in need. Public officials can stake out new ground to move beyond the political divisions of left and right and build a new coalition of people of goodwill that will focus on the best outcomes for those in need. So, lastly, what can I do? Well, first, we all need to turn to prayer, and each and every one of these issues is powerful, it is efficacious. We also need to educate ourselves on Catholic social teaching and then the realities of what's going on in our communities and our world, and then share that education if we can with others. We also need to act. We need to take concrete action. We need to feel the pinch. It shouldn't be comfortable to be a Christian. And finally, we really need to advocate for sound public policy. And to that end, I want to invite you to sign up for alerts on what the WCC is up to if you're interested. So during the legislative session, we'll keep you posted on what bills we're monitoring and send along action alerts. So that is all I've got. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to our time in Q&A.
Thank you, Tia. Thank you. Boy, there's quite a lot of information there, isn't there? It's your head just kind of spins. But one of the things, Tia, you said that really spoke to me was relational poverty. Relational poverty. I heard David Brooks the other night on the NewsHour talk about all of these shootings, this senseless violence that we see week after week. It's a carnage. And where's that happening? In our schools. If this doesn't tell us that we've degraded life to the extent that it's out of control, we're just not alive. Brooks said that a lot of these killers, it wasn't mental illness. It was men that felt so isolated, were so alone, felt so rejected that they thought the answer was to go kill a bunch of kids in school. Now think about that for a minute. Life is sacred, and that's why we have these talks. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot to talk about. So let's take a break. Kids, you've got a lot to think about. Think about these things. They're important. You are the future. You are the ones that are going to change the laws, that are going to change relational poverty. They're going to change these things that you hear about. And there's a lot there. But how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So take a little bit of time, take one thing and talk about it. We'll come back in 10 minutes. And we'll have some question and answer, okay? We'll see at about 10 after 7, okay?
brightness of your joy, O Lord. Let your light shine on me, the shining of your hope, O Lord. Let your light shine on me, shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me, shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me. As the sun rises, Lord, let your light shine on me, shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me. Your light to guide me, Lord. Let your light shine on me. Your light to lead, oh Lord. Let your light shine on me. Your light to direct me, Lord. Let your light shine on me. Your light to brighten, Lord. Let your light shine on me. Shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me. Shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me. Shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me. Shine on me, shine on me. Let your light shine on me.
There is a light that can overcome the darkness. There is no darkness that can overcome the light. There is a light that can overcome the darkness. There is no darkness that can overcome the light. Creator of unfailing light, give that same light to those who call you. May our lives proclaim your goodness, our voices sing your praise forever. There is a light that can overcome the darkness. There is no darkness that can overcome the light. Lord Jesus Christ, you are the true light of the world. Give us courage, strength, and grace to build a world of justice and peace. There is a light that can overcome the darkness. There is no darkness that can overcome the light. May the light of the Holy Spirit dispel the darkness of our times. Turn our hatred into love, our wars into the peace we so desire. There is a light. There is a light that can overcome the darkness. There is no darkness that can overcome the light. God's breath, vessel of a love divine. This is who you are. This is who I am. This is who you are. This is who I am. Dwelling of God, after God's likeness, capacity for the infinite. This is who you are. This is who I am. This is who you are. This is who I am. Eternally known, chosen of God, home of infinite majesty. This is who you are. This is who I am. This is who you are. This is who I am. Abode of divinity, receptacle of God, wellspring of life-giving water. This is who you are. This is who I am. This is who you are. This is who I am. Life in the Lord, branch of God, heir of the kingdom, the glory of God. This is who you are. This is who I am. This is who you are. This is who I am. God sings this litany eternally.
Okay, folks, why don't we bring it back and let's sit down and we'll continue on, okay?
This is who I am. This is who you are. This is who I am. This is who you are. This is who I am. This is who you are. This is who I am.
Okay, folks. That was what we were worried about. Once you break out the cookies and the milk, then it's like, forget it. Well, you know, we're having a talk about life, and guess what? Our next speaker's wife is pregnant, and she just called, and guess what? Life comes at any time, right? Life is a 24/7 situation. So he had to leave to attend to his wife. So I don't know if her water broke or what, but I can just say a few things. Steve is from a place called the Women's Alliance Clinic. They have offices in Racine and Kenosha. And they minister to women who are pregnant, and maybe are thinking about abortion or just need help. And so they counsel them, and they do a whole lot of stuff, both in Racine and Kenosha. So we're really hoping that he could explain, how that particular life issue is being lived out here in Racine and Kenosha. So I think we'll just go to question and answer. I think one of the other things I'd just like to say is, you see the wide range of life issues. There is a lot, right? There is a lot there. It's not just one issue. It spans so many things. It gets very complex, especially when we talk about medical research. So these aren't simple things. So we need to really educate ourselves and to really dive deep. And so we do have some literature in the back there, at least a beginning point. But it's not a simple thing. It really isn't. It is a wide range of issues and complex issues. But one thing for sure, we all need to be to advocate for life, to respect for life. So I have a portable mic, and so I'm going to walk around, and so we can hear whatever question you have. And Tia will can answer them from up here. Testing. Yeah, so I've got, there has to be a question, a starting question. Who's going to break the ice? Okay, Tom, I knew I could count on you. If there's one guy I could count on, Tom.
I have better voice than you have.
Okay. Just stay there and just talk.
Ma'am, I have worked on many Catholic charities.
Tom, just speak into here.
And faced many abortions. But our job was make them understand the value of life. And I think that is one thing this country needs. I have several doctors in my family in this country. When I really talk to them, they tell me the number of abortions that they see every day in hospitals and other places. So I think that is the place we really have to work. We cannot blame on a woman because she became pregnant. It can happen. So when I really hear that is the main reason I came today, to listen to you. And I just want to say, we have to preach, we have to make the youngsters understand not to get pregnant, but if they get pregnant, they should not abort.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so it's just really an advocacy is what you're saying, yeah, just for
And
life.
what are they doing? What do we really do? That's what I want to know. We don't do anything. We don't do anything. Only the father preach. The priest normally say, hey, this is, no, you cannot do it. It's a sin. You are killing. You are killing.
Right.
But we don't help them out to understand, hey, they need money. They need so many other things.
Okay, so thank you.
That's the place where we have to work.
Right. So what do you think is being done, Tia, to help women that are pregnant that might be considering abortion?
Yeah. So I think the first thing, obviously, that comes to mind is places like Steve's organization, Alliance Family Services, that they are showing up for women. Any woman who crosses their threshold is going to receive care, is going to receive for them, like they specifically do ultrasounds. But nobody leaves that clinic. I mean, they know they are pregnant or they are not. Nobody leaves without resources, right? So they're trying to connect them with whatever resources are available in the community. As I've been compiling all of our resources within the Diocese of Madison, realized there is so much And yet sometimes there's not enough, especially in our more rural areas that transportation supports are harder to find. But I think we need to normalize helping women too with these questions. It can feel so kind of cataclysmic, like the knowledge that you are pregnant, and that this life is something that you have to care for the next 18 years and potentially beyond. It's a big, like, unknown weight that's been suddenly placed upon you if you don't have other supports around you. So, I think there are these pregnancy care centers. There are a lot of secular nonprofits, too, out there that are helping. But the other thing I think is important to note that I saw a lot when I was working with the moms at Maggie's Place is that, like, women who are in the throes of crisis are expected to, like, drive all over creation and go to every different office for economic security and for sometimes their drug testing, and sometimes they have to go to the courthouse, and sometimes they have to also be at a job and also make all of their medical appointments. And they're doing it all at a time when they're the most medically kind of maybe fragile that they've ever been. So I think, to my mind, and this is Tia's commentary, that I think that we need to do better of centralizing our resources, creating family resource centers that I can come to one place and I can get legal help and I can get counseling and I can get food and baby supplies. We have other organizations too, like St. Vincent de Paul and the Knights of Columbus are providing help and support. And these are like within the church itself, but there are many, many organizations. But oftentimes the biggest challenge that a mother faces is just like, I don't even have a car, so how can I get to it? So. Yeah. A lot of the men of the women that I was working with were in and out of jail. So they were institutionalized. They were physically taken out. I think we've kind of created a culture that tells women that they know that they can't necessarily rely on him. They want to. They want a fairy tale life with a man who will show up for them, but they've seen time and again how it doesn't work. A curious thing, and this is just anecdotal, like when I was working at Maggie's Place, a lot of the moms did not want men around because they expected to be used. And they didn't trust even the male volunteers. Like it took time, like them showing up again and again and not, objectifying them. And themselves, yeah. 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 I think part of it is like helping, this is vague, it's not a social program, but helping communicate to people that like you are not your body. You're both a body and a soul. And you are worth, like part of this life and dignity of a human person means like you are worth being respected. You do not have to sleep with someone in order for them to love you. And if that's the case, then they're not worthy of your love. I think a lot of the women that I worked with were like, are you a nun? Like, are you, because they just really, a lot of them hadn't encountered people who had been successfully able to live this kind of vocation of like waiting until you're married, right? And the men that would come to volunteer, they'd be like, they wouldn't, yeah. So I I mean, I do not have an answer to that question. I've spent a lot more time of my time thinking about women and children specifically. But I think letting men know that they're valued, thinking more about the value of a father, right? Like, it's so abundantly clear what the value of a mother is because this child cannot be sustained without her. But when we think about...
Learning how to respect yourself.
Yeah.
Respect yourself.
Yeah.
First and foremost. So you're going out and using another person for your gratification.
Mm-hmm.
That's disrespect of yourself and that other person.
Yeah.
We've got another question here.
Well, I don't know if it's a question as much as a comment from my own personal experiences. You mentioned the Society for St. Vincent de Paul as one example. I've been a member over 20 years in our efforts, and through my work, I also worked with people in prison and in jail. And I think I liked a lot what you said this evening. Some of it was really hard to understand. You spoke very fast, and it's so complex.
Yeah.
But when we get down to the reality, because I've been into a lot of homes here in Racine. For years I was in Fond du Lac, and I was in a lot of homes. And the poor, there's a whole different reality between the life of the poor. We do not understand what it means to live on less than $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
Most of us do not. You know, my wife and I get several thousand a month just as retirement benefits from pension and from Social Security. Most of the people that we see, unless they have good paying jobs, and most of the people we see do not have good paying jobs. Many of them, if they're on disabilities, they're lucky if they get more than $1,000, $1,500 a month. Rents right now, I was in a home, my wife and I were in a home this morning. They have one bathroom, one husband and wife, one bedroom, small living room, small kitchen. And they're paying $880 a month. The life theme is that, I mean, we can talk in theory. You were suggesting at the end in terms of more programs for women who find themselves in these difficulties. And most of these women, I would tend to think, have no income or very limited income from my experience. And if they don't have any income, where are they going to get this money? Because this man that I'm sitting with here, he's been a taxman for many years, and he was telling me the fact is the politicians who say, well, we can't pay more taxes, we can't do this. One party wants to spend all this money on these social programs. We're getting into socialism. We're turning our country into a socialist country to offer these. But this is what Pope Francis is saying. I've read his document on the joy of the gospel, and the latest one he had too. And he's talking about the fact that the gospel is a social document. It's a talk. When Pope Francis came to talk to our Congress, he said you got to work for the common good. Mm-hmm. And what do we see in here at the state legislature or in Congress? Do we see much dialogue? Any working together across the aisles? Public policy makes the common good, and this country is so divided right now. You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, Tia, maybe you could talk about then the tie-in with poverty as you see it and how that affects these issues of life and
Yeah, it's huge, and yeah, I know I skated quite quickly past it because there's so much nuance, right? Like we could talk for days just about that. I think the first thing we need to think about and understand is that Jesus asked us to clothe the naked and feed the hungry and visit the imprisoned. And these are commands that he gave us, and he also did it himself. So poverty is definitely something we need to address. You touched on taxes, which is imperative, right? Because there are those out there who want to say that taxes inherently are evil. The Catholic Church says that the taxes are a necessary part of society, and furthermore, they need to be distributed kind of with equity based on someone's ability to pay, and that they are fundamentally called to serve the common good. I think it's hard to talk about specific social programs without getting kind of into the minutia, but we're both called on an individual level, on a church level. So we have these ministries like St. Vincent de Paul and more. Those are important, and then we also have to think about that in our voting decisions as well, that the life and dignity of the human person as it exists today in our country and in our state matters, and what candidates are really going to uphold that. There's obviously many considerations. We have a document called Faithful Citizenship, which you may have run across in the past, but if you're interested and you haven't decided who you're going to vote for and you're not really sure, like, how do I even go about beginning this? There's some good materials out there for thinking about all the issues that we consider.
Okay, I think we have time for another question or two. In the back here.
So, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I found out a lot of girlfriends that I have had abortions in their life, mostly just one per woman that I spoke with. And I'm just wondering if, like, the Archdiocese has anything recommended for dialogue and talking to these women. For example, I kind of, not to say got into it, but a girl and I went back and forth, and her situation was she was 14 when she had it, and she said that it was like the best thing she could have done for her life. So I didn't know how to respond to that. And I also tried to tell her that she was a mom and she's connected to this child, and she told me that she was not. So I also didn't know how to respond to that as well.
Yeah.
Just kind of question on how to talk to women and kind of educate them without offending them or their situation.
Yeah, that's a great question. And these are like the hardest things to encounter, right? Like the way that trauma manifests itself in us sometimes is a total denial. Like, that wasn't even a trauma, right? That was necessary. So I think it's in gentleness, and it happens over time. It doesn't happen usually in one conversation. The diocese has some really good resources through Project Rachel, which is a ministry to help those who are post-abortive. But and it doesn't sound like she'd probably be at that point where she'd be like wanting, especially help from the Catholic Church maybe in this area. So one thing that you can do, each of us can do is reach out to kind of gain those materials. They would also provide them to you as not a person who had received an abortion in the past. But I think when we're thinking about starting a conversation, it's never approaching someone with a tone of incrimination, because people don't choose abortion because they want it. There are some people out there who say, nobody wants to kill a child, right? Nobody gets pregnant with the intention of murdering the child, right? It's because of whatever set of circumstances I've been dealt, it just isn't going to work. And so having compassion for those circumstances, especially if there was violence, that's, I think, where it starts. Letting God kind of take the charge and lead in that healing process, and being there for her, and waiting around for years maybe until she's ready to talk about it.
I'd also thank you, Tia. I'd also like to add that the Archdiocese has a Respect Life office now, And our Respect Life Committee, I think we have 2 members here tonight, have met with Deacon Jim Mathias, who's the director of that office. In our first meeting with him, he had a boatload of resources. And I don't remember everything, Matt, maybe, or Donna, maybe you do, but I'm sure there are either people there or materials that would relate to exactly what you're talking about, is my guess, because there was a lot of stuff, work that they've done and background that they've got on that. So maybe you can connect with Matt. Could you raise your hand, Matt and Donna, right here? Okay. Any other questions? How about one more? Yes, but his wife is pregnant, and she called him about 15, 20 minutes ago and said, guess what, honey? Life comes at any time, doesn't it? So that's why we kind of started things early. Steve Cross, and he said he apologized very much, and he said he'd come back, but right now he's got, he had to go.
We on the Human Concerns Commission here at St. Rita's would welcome more members. If you're interested, please see one of us. It's not too taxing. But we would like to have more people working with us for ideas and just to plan next steps for the future. So see Deacon Greg or me or Amy Bigna. Anyone else here tonight from,
I'm not sure, but this is Susan Willing, and Amy is right up here. Amy, could you raise your hand? And myself. So, okay. Thank you, Tia. Can we get a nice... Okay, so before we close in prayer, I just want to remind you there's materials in the back that you can take, stuff that Tia and Marco brought, and it's some of the things that I brought. So not anywhere, exhaustive, but there's some good starting points there if you're interested to follow up. Okay, our next presentation was going to be on Sunday, December 4th, and Sunday, February 5th, 2023. And those are Sunday nights at 6 o'clock. We're having a little difficulty with the speaker for the December 4th date, so we're a little bit on the fence on that right now, so we'll keep you posted on that. I know that's only 4 weeks away, but for sure the February 5th date is we'll have a talk then. So thank you, Tia. Thank you, Marco. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know Sunday nights can be kind of maybe a night that you want to sit in and relax and maybe just take it easy, but thank you. This is a very important topic, and you are the church. The people here tonight, you are the church. And that's how things change, by having a well-formed conscience and going out there into the world and living your faith with the grace of God and courage. And so that's why we do these things, right? So the church can be the church. So, okay. Matt Schmidt from the Respect Life Committee is going to close us in prayer. Come on up, Matt.
So as part of the Respect Life ministry for about a month now, I would like to invite anyone who's interested in helping. Tomorrow evening, we have a meeting at 7 p.m. right here in the bride's room, and we're going to be assembling some baby blankets. We've decided to take the approach to reach out to mothers in need as one of our first steps.
Way to go, man.
And with that, if you'll please join me in prayer. Supreme Architect of the universe, You hung the stars in the sky. You put the planets in motion. You created us from clay, and your fingerprints are on all of us. Please enlighten our minds and teach us your ways. Even though we realize how precious life is, there are many who do not. Fill our hearts to overflowing so that we might pour out your love on others and share your message with them. Thank you to the Archdiocese, and thank you, Tia, for coming this evening and sharing the information with us. And in closing, I would just like to ask everyone to join me in the Our Father. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Amen. Thank you.